On the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis of how it impacts your school community. Plus, we're talking about the governor's budget proposal. What does it mean for you and what are the next steps? We've got two budget experts on the show to answer those questions and take your questions as well.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it's just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with ACSA's Executive Director, Dr. Edgar Zazwata. I'm Naj Alikan, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing Communications. Welcome. We are honored to have you back on a Tuesday, show number 101. Edgar, I'm going to start putting one of those like counters behind me just so we can keep track.
Did we even make it? Okay, I know it was budget day, and I know we had a lot of things going on. I mean, did we even make mention that last week was our 100th show?
I think we
or was I just pretending to pay attention to you and I didn't hear you?
Well, that might be completely correct there, that you weren't paying attention. But remember, when we came on, I was like that big. So you know, there was
I was distracted by your face.
There you go. Some technical issues last week. I think maybe we mentioned it, but among all of the budget stuff last week, we probably didn't have the celebration that we wanted to, but this is show 101. Amazing to think that we've been around for this long, but the viewers keep showing up. Sheldon Smith was our first on the chat today. Our good friend Neri and Sunny Dawn. They keep bringing us back, Edgar. So that's a good thing.
Well, that's awesome. The fact that we're still doing this 100 shows later. I mean, I remember in those early days of the pandemic when we were stuck at home and we were trying to think about how we were going to try to find various ways, right? It wasn't the only way. It was a various ways to communicate with our members. And, you know, credit to you and the team for kind of envisioning all this. And it's been a fun ride. So, no, kudos to us for 100. Okay. I totally missed it, but 101 this way.
That's all right. 101.
Keep it going for a while.
We've got a couple of budget experts on the show today to talk about the governor's budget proposal last week, things you need to know. There were a couple of subjects when I was talking with our panel yesterday that I hadn't seen in the budget. So very interested to hear about those. Edgar, we've had a week now since the budget proposal has come out. I know you spend a lot of time meeting with our members. What have been the reflections from our members 1 week out from the proposal?
Yeah, I think some of the themes have been, I think, a little bit initially relief, right? There was so much talk about whether the state was going to be able to fulfill some of the commitments, whether on the COLA, on whether the state continued to fund some of the big initiatives that have been implemented over a number of years. So I think just the fact that we were able to maintain some of that, I think, has been a sense of relief, especially given the comparison to some of the other parts of the budget, right? Like I think folks they see that like we have had the economy has slowed down, that revenues have slowed down, but yet for the most part, we've been able to maintain on education. The flip side of that, I think there is some pretty legitimate concern, which I know we're going to get into today, specifically on one of the governor's proposals to take money back. You know, call it what you will. I mean, some are calling this a major cut, but some of these discretionary dollars that have already gone out, that are going to continue to go out here this fiscal year, that the state is pulling back. So you call it, yes, good overall, but this is going to present a problem. And the one thing that we're already finding out is that districts have had made plans for these dollars and in very diverse ways. So I think that's probably the number one piece. And I always joke when we talk about budget, it's our job to find things that we don't like. This was a pretty big one, right? This is not like in the weeds. This is a pretty significant one. Yeah. And while we're going to have to be sensitive to some of the fiscal realities of the state, I think this is going to be an area of at least emphasis for us about, is there some other ways to mitigate this and achieve the goal that the state is trying to accomplish, is to fund the COLA, fund some of these other programs, but doing it in a way that maybe doesn't disrupt what the field has already, the work that's already started.
Yeah, we're going to give you the opportunity to ask your budget questions coming up in just a moment. First off, Edgar, how you feeling? You doing all right? I know
mean,
this
you know
kind
what?
of
This is a it's an interesting time for ACSA, and those that know, we've seen a lot of people in person. We always kicked off the year kind of sprinting, where we had our ECC conference last week. We have our negotiator symposium this week. We have our superintendent symposium next week. So get to see a lot of our members. So it's an exciting time. It keeps us running, but enjoying the run.
Well, I mean, Jim Southwick right there, wants to acknowledge that he saw you on Wednesday night at the airport. So I know you've been running all over the state. That's why I had to bring that up.
You know what? And I apologize for anybody. There was one night, and I've lost track of which night. This is an interesting story. I was walking up into one of my various flights. I think it was on 4 or 5 last week. And one of them, I walked up and I saw that it was a plane full of educators going to one of the conferences. And I'm not going to lie. I will be transparent. I threw on my hoodie. And I did, and I was like, maybe nobody will know I work for ACSA right now. So and I usually don't do that. It was maybe just that one night. I was trying to hide a little bit.
Yeah,
maybe
Jim caught you. That's apparently what it is. Jim caught you. Folks, let me bring up a couple of things for you. We showed you before the start of the new year the California School Dashboard video, the English version. That video is now available in Russian, Spanish, Japanese, and Chinese. You can download those videos, versions of those videos, here on our ACSA YouTube page. So available now, English, Russian, Spanish, Japanese, and Chinese. And Edgar, before we move on to our budget topic, I just want to make mention of this. Since the start of the year, as new boards are being sworn in statewide, we have seen a number of superintendents lose their jobs because of politics, because of a lot of the messaging that school board members were running on in the November 2022 election. Now that they've been voted in and they are through their process of now being sworn in, we're seeing a lot of this. And I want to bring this quote out. We had this in EdSource. This is a quote that you had. Quote, every school board has the right to make changes, and we aren't surprised that the 2022 election cycle gave boards more of a voice in who leads their schools. However, school leaders with a track record of supporting students should be treated fairly and not evaluated based on politics. Again, a lot of politics playing into this, Edgar, but again, we're seeing more of this. You brought another one to my attention early this morning. It's a strange time out there for school leaders at all levels, but we're hearing a lot of this politics playing into the role of superintendent.
No, it's unfortunate. I mean, and look, our superintendents will the first one to admit this. They know what they're walking into, right? And like we talked to EdSource about, yes, we recognize every board has the ability to make changes. That's part of the job of a school board member, to evaluate who's going to run the system, who's going to be the CEO of your respective district. So we appreciate that. We respect that. I think unfortunate, it's the manner that some of these cases have gone down. A superintendent not even being in the country because they were helping their ailing mother, across the Atlantic, and the board calls a special meeting to fire the superintendent and the chief deputy without any notice, right? There's still a way that you treat people, and especially when the community, by all accounts, has been supportive. Yeah, this is problematic, right? And this is not just about us protecting our members. Mm-hmm. The data, the research shows stability matters. There is a correlation between stable leadership, not just at the school level, but at the district level. And when you're talking about the implications of just making these changes when it's not warranted, it's something that we're obviously keeping an eye on. We obviously represent superintendents, we represent school administrators, but we actually think that this is something that the public should also be wary of, especially how this has been going down across the state.
Yeah, and Sonny Dawn asked the question, how will this information impact your messaging at the superintendent's conference, superintendent symposium next week? Obviously, it's going to be a topic of discussion because, as we said, politics is playing more of a role right now in our school communities. That allows me to promote this, our ACSA legal support. This isn't just for superintendents, but this is for our members, district leaders at all levels. If you are in need of some legal support, go ahead and go to ACSA.org. There's that little hamburger menu on the left-hand side. Click that. That'll give you more information about ACSA legal support. Okay, let's switch gears. Let's talk budget right now. Last week, of course, the governor's budget proposal came out. Let's get you some answers to what you need to know and what have the reflections been like out in the field. Derick Lennox is the Senior Director of Governmental Relations and Legal Affairs with the California County Superintendents, and Megan Baier, ACSA Legislative Advocate. She's been a frequent guest with us here, and we always have lots of questions for Megan. I'm sure our viewers will not disappoint today. Derick and Megan, so good to have you on the show. Let me start with the budget itself. And Megan, I'll have you answer this first, and then Derick after that. The framework. As you dig in, as you have been digging in over the last week, what are you seeing? What are the members saying? Megan, I'll have you start.
Thanks, Naj, for the question. So, Edgar alluded to this a little bit. We were happy not to see reductions. We are seeing the overall budget on the general fund side. So the state budget that pays for, things like Medi-Cal and food stamps and all kinds of health and human services, they are experiencing reductions to programs. And thankfully, we're not seeing that in Prop 98 due to some good budgeting over the last few years. We have a relatively high COLA at over 8%, and the governor is proposing to fully fund that at this time. That's being extended to a slew of categorical programs, including special education. Also, we have Derick with us today. The county offices are going to get the full COLA, so we're happy to see the educational programs getting that full COLA. And the governor right now, he is proposing not to tap into the Prop 98 reserve. Economists seem to think that this downturn is going to last a while. And so the governor is proposing to hold on to those funds for as long as possible. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the legislature reacts to that.
Yeah. And Derick?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back on the show. It's been a minute, and maybe the last time I was on was when I worked at ACSA. So it's great to be back with the ACSA family here again.
Derick, I told them that you were allowed back on. Usually we punish people a little bit for when they leave, but we let you back in.
A 2-year hiatus.
Yeah.
I have felt it. And Edgar was my previous boss, and now he's the big boss. So yeah, it's perfectly understandable. I appreciate you letting me do my time. As we reflect on the budget, in addition to the great points that Megan brought up, there's something that many of us are noticing, which is that in spite of the $22.5 billion deficit on the total state budget, we see the preservation of key whole child programs that the legislature and the governor have been interested in implementing over the last few years. I feel like there's a lot of gratitude in the field to see that signaling from the state that in spite of a downturn, the state is fully supporting the implementation of these programs, because it's not easy. We're talking about TK expansion, expanded learning opportunities, universal meals, community schools. These are all transformative programs that are the signature features of this governor's administration, and for many legislators, a lifetime of work has gone into it. So we were delighted to see that those are being preserved. And we think that makes a lot of sense for a couple of reasons here. The first is because, as you mentioned earlier in the show, Naj, the 2022 dashboard results are putting a mirror to all of us and showing us what we have suspected for a long time now, which is that our students are struggling. They've experienced a lot of trauma over the last 2 years. Significant amount of learning acceleration is needed. 45% of California high schoolers before the pandemic felt sad or hopeless. That's way higher than the national average. So we have a lot of work to do on behalf of our students. And this is a great opportunity to continue that work in spite of a downturn by continuing the investments in these whole child programs.
Naj, before I ask the next question, I think it's worth pointing out both for Derick and Megan. I don't say this just because they both worked on my team or involved in any of the recruitment.
Something's coming.
No. I actually mean it, that these two, when we talk about just leaders in the advocacy community here in California, I think it's worth saying just how you guys get to see just when we have them bring on and giving their insight, but not just knowledgeable, but in terms of just actually being able to impact policy and had their connections with the policymakers across the street. So we're fortunate that we have them on today. It's just great working with both of them. Megan, now that I properly gave you your kudos there. One of the things that keeps coming up, I alluded to it in the intro, still some questions, and I think it was Virginia who asked a question about the block grant, the arts and music and instructional materials block grant, which I think I got the name right, which the governor has had plans for. Bring us up to speed. What have we learned in the last week? What's going on that front?
Well, thank you for the really nice introduction. So this is a piece that we are very concerned about of the governor's proposal. The very long title, but essentially the music and arts block grant that had allowable uses for virtually anything. It could be used for salaries. It could be used for pension offset. So basically broadly discretionary despite its name. Districts actually have received half of the allocation already. They were scheduled and told that they would receive the other half of their allocation in the spring. The governor is proposing to sweep back $1.2 billion of that. We are very concerned. We've heard from many districts. Virtually all of them have planned for these dollars. In some instances, districts have actually spent these dollars. They've been included sometimes in bargaining agreements. So we have a lot of concern about the local consternation that this is going to create if the governor really does sweep back these funds. And, I will also say there is some question of whether the funds will go out as scheduled, only to be when the budget's enacted, if they'll be swept back. So there's a lot of confusion and consternation up here on what's going to happen to these funds. I think the other piece that I, want to highlight for folks, and to the extent that some of you are, our VPLAs and are doing advocacy and talking to members, the legislature had a hearing today and on the budget, the governor's budget proposal, and it was very clear that there is a perception that the block grant dollars and the Prop 28 dollars, if you recall, the art Prop 28 dollars that voters passed in November, that you can just do an interchange there. However, these pots are totally different allowable uses. So I think, ACSA is going to have to do a lot. And with our partners, ACSA or the California County Supes, we're going to have to do a lot of education, letting members know this is not interchangeable dollars. There seems to be some confusion there.
Folks, want to remind you, if you have questions for our budget team here, go ahead and put those into the chat. Amy, I see your question there about the equity multiplier. We'll hit that in just a second. Derick, I want to ask you about local control funding formula, which obviously was about local control and then student outcomes. Over the past few years, we've seen the governor really start moving towards looking at the whole child. We've seen state preschool, transitional kindergarten, after school programs, all of these benefiting the student while they're in school, but also out of school. Are we seeing a pivot away from LCFF? Is this something that perhaps our members, our viewers should be seeing through a different lens? Did we lose Derick or just me?
Pardon me. I've been away for so long, I forgot about the mute button.
You forgot the rules.
So I think probably the right way to look at this is a little bit nuanced. Let's start with the fact that $80 billion in the K-12 budget is for the LCFF. That is discretionary funding. It's local control. It's not going anywhere. The governor made a priority to fully fund an 8+% proposed COLA. That's a really big deal. So I don't think that this governor or this legislature are shying away from local control in that sense. What I do think that they're trying to do is acknowledge what I hear from educators in the field all the time, which is that the next transformation in education is the acknowledgement that students bring their whole selves to school, and that includes their adversities, and how we as school leaders respond matters. So when you talk about the what we would pejoratively call in the past categoricals, and they are that, but I want to get away from that term for these purposes, these whole child programs. It's a really big deal that we're shifting towards that and investing money from the top down to do that. I think that's a little bit different than what districts are able to do using their local control dollars, because it's pretty difficult to create the community partnerships, for example, in community schools, to create the braided funding and all of this type of stuff. If you're a large district, maybe you can do it, and many have. But for the most part, you really need the state from the top down to say this is a priority, and then to help districts implement it over time. So I don't think that there's a shift away from local control. I think it's an and conversation. And I think it's one that many parents and community members and district leaders that we've heard from have been yearning for some time.
Megan, one of the things that we've been talking about is that, and I would actually say this, maybe this is a good thing, there wasn't a ton of new programs, new proposals. I mean, it's something you've been talking to us about, probably because of the fiscal realities. With that said, one of the pieces that has stuck out, and I think Amy had a question about it, this equity multiplier, this new provision that the governor is proposing. I know there's some accountability pieces that we know something about. What can you tell us about, or what we've learned over the last week about this equity multiplier and any changes to the accountability system?
Sure. So I'm going to preface this by saying we don't know a lot. We have a lot of unanswered questions. The governor will probably release further detail in February, but let me tell you where we're at the moment. So the governor is going to be proposing this new, what's being termed as an equity multiplier. It's going to be targeted to school sites, not districts. It's going to be targeted to school sites with very, very high levels of poverty, 85 to 90% free lunch, not free and reduced, free. So this is kind of a pretty big departure from the way LCFF has worked with, funds really going to the district level. Those funds are going to be targeted to our lowest income students. There are going to be certain requirements of how those funds get spent. It's not going to be as flexible as the LCFF, although I cannot yet tell you what exactly those requirements are. They've just signaled that it's going to be a little bit different than the traditional LCFF dollars. And then coupled with that, you kind of alluded to it, it's related somewhat, but also a little bit different. There will be changes to our accountability system as it relates to the LCAP, differentiated assistance, system of support, targeting lowest performing student subgroups. We don't yet know exactly where those cutoffs will be or exactly how we're going to be looking at it. And again, there seems to be a school site emphasis. And there may be some requirements about what kind of spending needs to happen at the school site level. So more to come. Still a lot of outstanding questions, but we're certainly seeing the shift to more school site allocations and then requirements.
Derick, let me follow that up because the price point, as far as I could see on this equity multiplier, was $300 million. And in the grand scope of the public education budget, it's not really a huge number. Do you see this as a one-time thing? We're going to see what the successes and challenges were and then make a decision on it about whether the governor pours more money into it in years after? Well, what are you seeing on this?
Yeah, thanks, Naj. Well, we know it's an ongoing investment. That's what's indicated in the summary. But going back to your question, may require a little bit of prognostication that I don't have access to because I don't know what the administration wants to do in the future. But let me posit one idea, which is that the $300 million could matter a lot or a little based on the number of eligible school sites that are out there. So when you look at the eligible school sites, as Megan was talking about, you're talking about 90% free meals at the elementary and middle school level, 85% free meals at the high school level. Those are very high thresholds. And there's a good chance that a lot of those schools are going to qualify for community eligibility programs on their meals, which means they may actually be collecting less forms than some other districts. So needless to say, it's going to be probably a small quantity of eligible school sites, which could be good and bad. One, it's not going to affect maybe as many as a larger eligibility list might with lower percentages. But on the other hand, it could allow more money to do more good in targeted ways. So I think what would be really interesting is if this investment of the $300 million, if it turns out to be successful and a real difference maker, and folks seem to coalesce around it in the field, that we actually expand eligibility over time, and it could become something that is part of the LCFF ongoing. I think the bigger questions that we have been receiving from the field, and I'll be really interested to hear Megan's feedback as well, because you work with more of the site level administrators Two, who are going to have to do a lot of this work, is first around the LCAP. Okay, so currently the LCAP is a strategic planning document for a school district. So it's not necessarily at the school site level. Doesn't mean it can't be, but when it comes to changing the LCAP, I think our fundamental question is always from a transparency and accountability perspective. Are we taking steps that are going to make the LCAP more streamlined, shorter, and more accessible to the public? If the answer to those questions is yes, then we might have a really good amendment to the LCAP, and maybe that's what we're looking at here in the TBL. We can be hopeful. On the other hand, if it increases complexity or decreases the transparency from an average parent or community member in the public, that's something that we would not like to see. So how they treat the LCAP here is both an opportunity and a potential challenge for districts. And then I think at a broader level, it's not just about the money and about creating a plan. It's about how are we as a state ensuring that local school sites and districts have the capacity to be able to close achievement and opportunity gaps. That capacity building is about more than just programs. It's about human capacity, and not just adding more people, but retraining the mindsets of the people who are already there, who are doing incredible work in the classroom, around the classroom. So many opportunities with this type of proposal, whatever it ends up being, but also some challenges that I know we're going to hear from the field. And as I mentioned before, I'd be remiss not to ask Megan, what are you hearing from, folks at the school site level and otherwise? How are they reacting to this?
It's just a lot of questions. We're lacking so much detail and specificity, and we appreciate the governor's intent and goals behind it, but kind of just as you outlined, really understanding what it is and what the actual difference is. And we all know there's a lot of good intentions sometimes get us, and some complicated, it's hard to comply and it's not necessarily serving the interests of kids. So we're following closely and looking forward to seeing more.
Derick, I'll ask you the next question, and it's Jim Southwick's question. I'll ask his question since he was worried about my well-being there at the airport. He asked about, is there any money to go to kind of these Williams settlement issues for visits, because there is a number of requirements, and he notes there in his message all the things coming down the pipeline. Bottom line, are we going to see any revenues on this front?
Yeah, the answer is I don't know. But the other side of that is I think we do have to think hard about this, because we have been stuck in an API-based Williams selection criteria for a long time, even after the API was long gone. So it was not until 2021 that we passed AB 599. That was one that we were a co-sponsor on with public advocates, ACLU, Los Angeles County Office of Ed, to change the criteria for how you end up on a Williams monitoring list and get that support. One of the challenges is, as we added in CSI and ATSI, these federal indicators, to qualify districts for that list, it's essentially blown up the list. And so we have not seen the data yet, but I would not be surprised to see a significant increase in the number of schools that are qualified for Williams monitoring because of chronic absenteeism. That was a pre-pandemic problem, but it was a worsened problem due to the pandemic. So I do think that we need to address how we ensure that the quality of Williams monitoring is going to be great going forward, as it should be. It's a baseline for the types of things that we look at in Williams, like facilities and teacher quality and other things. So it's a really great question, and there is no resolution to it at this time.
Megan, I got two questions for you. First off, Cody Walker asks, has there been any word on when Prop 28 funds will be coming to districts? And then the other question I had for you, and this may be getting a little bit into the weeds, about transitional kindergarten ratio, because it, just looking at it at this point, if we were going to, kind of have a crystal ball, this could be something contentious inside the state capitol as we move through the process. So two questions there, Prop 28 and then transitional kindergarten ratio.
Sure. I'll take TK first. So TK implementation is happening on the same timeline. We're going to see next year, kids up to April birthdays get folded in. Some of you may recall, so right now this year, we're in a 12-to-1 TK teacher to student ratio, which is a big departure from previous practice. There was a legislative agreement last year to go to 10-to-1. However, the commitment was to fund it, because obviously staff cost money because of the budget, the economic slowdown. We don't have the same level of revenues available to fund those positions. So what you're seeing in the budget is the governor maintaining the 12-to-1 ratio. Now, the 10-to-1 ratio was a huge legislative priority. And for folks who are wondering where that comes from, that's the preschool ratio that preschools who have traditionally served these 4-year-old students have maintained. So it is going to be an interesting point. This is just the governor's January proposal. We've got 6 months of negotiation. So it's an item that we'll be following closely. And we do expect the legislature to push for that 10-to-1 ratio, depending how revenues look. On the second question, Prop 28. So that's something we didn't really talk about too much, but voters passed the arts initiative. The budget is going to get bigger. We're going to expand and take on part of the general fund side to fund that initiative. Those allocations are going to start going out for the following school year. So we're going to see them for the next school year. The estimate is about $946 million. Although that's contingent, it's calculated as whatever 1% of Prop 98 is. So that'll be, contingent on how revenues, it could go up or down. And I will just say, since I have the platform, there are a lot of outstanding questions about how that funding is going to work, what the baseline is going to be, what all the rules are going to be. It was created by initiative, and so it wasn't vetted through like the State Department of Education or the legislature. So we're still waiting to see guidance from the department on kind of like all the rules governing it. So hope to bring that back to you all when we have more answers on that as well.
Cody, and I'll just tag on to that. I saw your question about, flexibility around credentialing and whatnot. And to Megan's point, this is something the team is focused on, not just this issue specifically, but all of the issues around Prop 28. Ultimately, we believe it was something that's good for kids and good for schools. Now, how do we actually make this work in practice with all the operational administrative requirements is something that we're very dedicated to here at ACSA. So we'll definitely have more on that front. As we wrap up, one question to both of you, just curious of any final thoughts, things you guys are looking at, things that come to mind, issues that you're looking for as you're representing our members here, and maybe just talk to us about what comes next now that the proposal is out. Derick, I'll start with you.
Well, I think the exciting thing about our community of advocates here representing the field is that we work really closely together. And our members are Megan's members, of course, but it goes broader than that. We work with all of our coalition partners to advocate in the best interests of students and to make sure that new programs that we have are not only ambitious, but also practical and implementable. So that's really important that we hear from you all, and we appreciate that. I know that for our members, we're going to be looking very closely at the extent to which the interventions that we help districts with and that the state intervenes to provide resources to help close achievement gaps, that they're not just one-offs, right? We're talking about $300 million here, but the truth is across the state, districts should have access to early and often interventions to prevent achievement gaps and opportunity gaps from widening before we even get to the point of differentiated assistance or Williams or ending up on any list. That's all of our mutual goals. So how do we make sure that those resources are available to the field early and often? That's our vision for what we would like to see in these whole child programs going forward.
Megan, final thoughts?
So I'm going to take it in a different direction and say that I'm looking forward to, we're going to have an in-person legislative action day this year. We're seeing a lot more people. We're going to be, able to meet with legislators, hopefully in person, and work with all you folks, good folks in the field, and see you at conferences. So, last year we're still kind of in this like weird hybrid space, and the legislature was too. It seems like they're going back a little bit to opening up access to the public a little bit more, and we're looking forward to, having a little bit more direct interaction. And, there's something gets lost sometimes when you're only advocating via Zoom. So.
All right. Megan Baier, ACSA Legislative Advocate, Derick Lennox, Senior Director of Governmental Relations and Legal Affairs. I don't know how they fit all of that onto a business card over there at the California County Supes, but somehow they do that. Megan and Derick, so good to have you guys on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much.
Edgar, as we wrap up, we're just on the other side of 1:30. Want to make note to everybody. Edgar and I not on next week because we will be over at the ACSA Superintendent Symposium. Hello, Monterey. So if you're down there for Soup Symposium, definitely say hello. We're so excited to have you guys back there. Second year in a row, we're going to be in person for Soup Symposium. So good to have all of you down there. Edgar, your final thoughts. We've heard from Derick. We've heard from Megan about what to expect. Your final thoughts, especially because Megan mentioned it, Legislative Action Day coming up, an opportunity to advocate on behalf of your school communities. This is kind of a crucial time for our members to get some work done inside the state capitol.
Yeah, I take some solace in hearing Derick, within their, mind you, they're one of our closest partners with the California County Superintendents. There are members as well, right? But you heard a lot a synergy between Megan and Derick. But I would say that, we just had an Ed Coalition meeting yesterday. The Ed Coalition is our labor partners, CTA, CFT, PTA, CSCA, all of the broader education community, the School Boards Association. And I would say that kind of what you heard today was some of the general theme. Generally speaking, we're all happy that at the funding levels, for the most part, that education was protected, but I think we're all zeroing in on the same issues. And I think that's going to be important when it comes to the advocacy. We're talking about Ledge Action Day. I think the more that we all of our statewide, all of us acronyms, right? The more that we're talking from the same voice, I think it will give us some potential to make some traction. Albeit, we're going to have to wait and see. It's early in the year. We'll have to see what the fiscal condition is come May revise. If the state's able to catch up a little bit when it comes to revenues, that will also dictate, what the May revise proposal is and what maybe the final outcome for the budget deliberations are for this year.
Yeah, and more information on Legislative Action Day. We just put the contact information there in the chat. Contact Suzanne Caffrey at that email address for more information on Legislative Action Day. Edgar, good to see you. We'll see each other down in Monterey next week. Again, folks, not on the air next week, but we are on the week after. Thank you so much for being with us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive here, ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube Wednesdays, 1 p.m. Have a great rest of the day and great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.